Okay, well, it's been quite a while since the last interview, entirely my fault. This evening, I'm talking with Dan Capp, the man behind the musical project Wolcensmen. Wolcensmen is an English pagan or neopagan musical project, and very evidently so from its sound, themes, and aesthetics. And we'll be talking not only about the evolution of Wolcensmen, but also about paganism and neopaganism, especially in England, and about the runes and even bind runes. So, plenty there to interest you. You can check out Wolcensmen, link below, but it is WOLCENSMEN.com. Thanks very much. Dan, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no, good to be here. No, thank you for having me, Angel.
Thank you. And so you are the singer and a sole musician behind the musical project, Wolcensmen, which is a kind of dark folk, pagan inspired project. Before we get into your influences, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your background. I know that the original music you released was on a very limited release, I think just 30 copies, and now you've grown and are releasing a colored vinyl and all kinds of interesting things. So.
Yeah. Well, originally I'm really a guitarist, and I kind of I began in the sort of punk scene in my teens, and I had a couple of bands back then where I was just the guitarist. I eventually went on from there. I went on to play in a hardcore band for a few years, where we toured Europe a few times. But throughout all of that, I was a real fanatic for black metal, and some listeners who are familiar with black metal might know that there's a strong relationship between black metal and kind of this dark folk neoclassical style. With lots of black metal albums featuring acoustic interludes between songs, or even full acoustic songs. And then you have certain bands who kind of veered off of their usual path and made a full acoustic or neoclassical album. Bands like Ulver with their album Kveldsanger. And then you have Imperium, who started as a kind of My Dying Bride-esque doom band. And then for their third album, they went full acoustic for a couple of albums. So I was really heavily into black metal, and I was always very kind of taken in by these acoustic and neoclassical aspects that these bands had. I found them incredibly evocative. And so fast forward a number of years, and I was on tour managing a band, and I happened to be in Dublin at the time. And I was in a bar watching a typical Irish folk band play, and I sort of thought to myself, why don't we ever see this in England? It's just it's such a like a common thing to see in Ireland. Yeah. But you just don't get it in England. Not very often anyway. So I kind of, these two ideas merged, this kind of love for this really dark sort of romantic metal associated folk music merged with this idea of, well, maybe I should try and create some English folk music of my own. I mean, as it turned out, the music that I went on to create wasn't really the kind of thing that you would see, played in a jolly kind of pub or something like that. Right. It's a bit darker and more, certainly more niche than most folk music, I suppose. Yeah. So that's really where, when Wolcensmen was born, the merging of these two ideas, and I just, as I say, I was just a guitarist at the time. I'd never sung, but I had a basic understanding of recording in order to just make a quick demo. So I wrote a few songs, wrote some lyrics. I couldn't really find a singer who was passionate in the same way that I was about that kind of music. So I just had to go at singing myself. And the initial kind of vocals were a bit sketchy, a bit rough around the edges. But since that demo, which came out in 2013, I've really kind of tried to hone my skills as both a guitar player, a composer, and a singer.
Right, great. Yeah, and certainly when I was growing up in England, although I'm in America now, folk music had a kind of reputation of being very hokey and kitschy and sort of for like old men and not very serious. But your music is very atmospheric and very nostalgic and sort of mystical and romantic, and it's very different. And even before listening to the music, the imagery that you have on your albums or your logo is very much associated with paganism, I guess English paganism, probably mostly. The runes. One of your albums has a kind of very Lord of the Rings feel to it, which is not bad. I think I like it. It's kind of cool. But what is that all about? Why did you draw on paganism for your inspiration?
Well, it was really the most natural thing for me to do as a pagan, and also the music that I strive to create is very much about picking the listener up and myself as the composer and transporting us to a more mystical time. So it wouldn't make any sense to do that musically, to kind of take the listener to this kind of pre-industrial kind of mystical age. With the sounds of the music, it wouldn't make any sense to take the listener there whilst singing about I don't know, relationship problems or,
Right.
Or even Satanism or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from the fact that Satanism is not an ideology which I hold to, it just wouldn't make sense with the music, really. The music is designed to take the listener to a very a nature-bound environment. And you mentioned Lord of the Rings, and I mean that's a huge compliment to me, because when my idea with Wolcensmen was always to give the listener the same feeling that they had when they read something like Lord of the Rings. So in the same way that Tolkien's work transports you to another time and place which somehow feels like it could have existed.
Yeah.
That's also my intention with Wolcensmen, to transport the listener to a more a realm where things kind of feel timelessly at home, where things kind of are on one hand very unfamiliar, but on the other hand kind of strangely familiar, like
Right.
like Middle Earth. I don't know if you get what I'm saying there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think you completely succeed in transporting the listener to this sort of other world that's both strange and familiar. And this this description, I think it's really the case that today everybody thinks they need more answers to everything, but I think we need more mystery. And it's really the kind of mystery that gives life, or at least underlies the meaning of life in a way. We need to feel that we're part of something greater, whether that's nature or deity or fate or whatever it may be. But maybe you could just go into a little bit about how you became interested in paganism and your practices or what groups you've been involved with, if that's not digging too deep into your personal life.
Yeah. Okay. Well, my spiritual path has been a kind of very convoluted one, a very windy one.
Yeah.
I was born into a very, I'd say, atheist family.
Right.
Yeah, because my cousin, who was about the same age as me, he was born into quite a Christian family. So my parents decided to have me christened at the same time. So I was christened, but I never had any involvement with the church or anything like that.
Right.
I grew up early on in life. I'd always been very fascinated with the supernatural, but I did that typical thing that probably lots of millennial teens do, which was to reject all religion and all spirituality when I hit my teens, and proudly declare myself an atheist. But it was all a front, really. I still, deep down, I still held a strong kind of affiliation for the supernatural and the spiritual. And I through bands like because I was heavily into extreme metal, and for example, there was a band called Dissection from Sweden who developed this very interesting theology, I guess you could call it, in a way, called Gnostic Luciferianism, which was kind of a merging of Gnosticism and Satanism. And I found these ideas really, really fascinating, and I explored them, quite deeply. Not throwing myself into them, but I wanted to know what they were about to try and understand them.
Right.
But really, I kept coming back to the idea that one's spirituality should be in tune with one's ancestry.
Right. Yeah.
And I was also a huge fan of Burzum, the black metal band Burzum, and Burzum always had a very strong, always presented the runes and things in the artwork, and I became very fascinated with those. So even though I kind of went off on these tangents, I always kept coming back to this idea of your spirituality being tied more to your ancestral origin. And I started to look more into the history of England, and I'm half Dutch. My mother's Dutch, so the history of these two lands and what was the original religion of these places.
Yeah.
So that's really when I started to throw myself head first into Germanic paganism, and I think the first book that I really read and initiated my practice was a book called Oak and Ash and Thorn, which is actually a book about Celtic shamanism.
Oh, okay.
And I'd become interested in that because I'd read a book by Graham Hancock called Supernatural, which is about using like entheogens, psychotropic plants to access the spirit world. But I wanted to find a way of kind of making that sort of connection without the use of drugs. So I looked into these ideas of meditation and things, and these book. I read a couple of books on Celtic shamanism, and from there I had a couple of powerful experiences. And then I discovered the books of an author called Brian Bates, who wrote a book called The Real Middle Earth, and a book called The Way of Weird. Right. And both of those took this kind of shamanistic concept, but bound it to an Anglo-Saxon tradition.
Right. Yeah.
And really painted a very, very vivid picture of the spiritual worldview of the early English people.
Yeah.
So those were quite kind of watershed books for me, really, because that's what really ignited my imagination and kind of compelled me to look further into the more kind of attested and academic sources for what we know about the beliefs of those people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. And have you been involved in any neopagan groups, or it's been a solo practice?
It's mostly solo practice. I have been involved with a couple of groups, and I do meet with at least one group several times a year. I won't name the group, but it's a group that focuses specifically on the English gods as they are named. Lots of heathen groups in England tend to worship Odin and Thor.
Yeah, right.
Whereas the group I'm involved with speaks of Woden and Thunor,
Cool.
which it makes more sense to me to do that. I don't really, because I think the English have this very we've almost forgotten that we have a direct connection to this tradition. So we
Yeah, that's
almost
right.
we almost try and seek it indirectly via
Yes.
Scandinavia
Yeah.
or Germany on things,
Hmm.
and we think, oh well, we're somewhat closely related to the Scandinavians or the Germans or whatever, so we can just borrow their gods.
Right.
And so many people don't realize that we actually have a very direct connection to those gods. They're just
Yeah.
the names are slightly different, and
Hmm.
the festivities and the practices are just slightly different, but just as authentic.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's always struck me as slightly strange that the English would be, using the 24 runes of
Yeah,
continental Europe when they have, England had its own runic alphabets,
yeah,
alphabet in quote, of course, but had its own runes, and the runes are actually more in number in England and a little bit different, and some of the meanings are slightly different and sounds as well. So yeah, it is a different culture, although very closely related. But yeah, when I haven't mentioned this in public before, but when I was around 17, I became involved in a neopagan group on the sort of outskirts of Kent, and actually, although you could definitely criticize it and criticize the guy who was running it for many reasons. I think a couple of really good things were that he also focused very much on the English tradition and would say Woden, not Odin, and really, maybe more importantly, sort of gave a sense that there was something spiritual in England or in Great Britain that could be really rediscovered through various ways like rituals. But I think, also aesthetically or musically, these things can be rediscovered as well. And I don't know about what you think, but I'll ask your opinion. I think one of the things about neopaganism is sometimes it can be very sort of like dressing up and pretending that we're back in, 1,000 years ago or 1,500 years ago or whatever. And while everybody has the same opinions as the most modern person you could ever find in any city, and it seems like it's sort of pasted on a kind of veneer. But there is, I think, a way of really getting in touch with one's ancestral roots or with some kind of deeper spirituality and with nature and with deity or however we might conceive of it. But and I think one of those ways is aesthetically, and another way is sort of maybe this isn't quite the right word, but intellectually, where you explore things deeply and kind of integrate them after a long period of contemplation. But how does Wolcensmen's music sort of bring back these sort of ancient traditions or ancient wisdom, do you think?
well, one example I can give, and you just mentioned the Anglo-Frisian runes, of
Yeah.
which there are a greater number, and in the Anglo-Frisian runes, uniquely, we have the what many people call the Hallows. So we have runes which are, some people believe, myself included, are representative of the Grail mythos, the Arthurian
Mhm.
tradition.
Right.
So you have this kind of merging of the Germanic and the Celtic in the English runes. So you have the Calch rune, which
Right.
represents the chalice, or
Yeah.
could represent the chalice, and you have the Quaoth rune to represent the sword, and the Gar rune to represent the spear,
Yeah.
um, and the Stan rune to represent the stone, and those either all four or certainly three of those runes are only found in the English rune
Yeah.
row, and I took those as a focus for partly as a focus for my most recent album, Fire in the White Stone,
Mm.
and the white stone of the title of that album refers to Calc, the chalice rune. So it was this kind of way of bringing to life the Anglo-Frisian runes, and sort of merging them with this Arthurian mythology that we have in the British Isles. So that's one way that I try to kind of bring them to life, and I love the idea that I can try and bring these ideas to people's attention. You know, most of these ideas are not necessarily my own. They're things that I've read from other people, but they sometimes come from quite obscure sources or from people that aren't very well known.
Right.
And the idea that of giving them a platform with Wolcensmen is quite important to me.
Yeah. I mean, there is the author, of course, Nigel Pennick, who's probably quite well known in England, but I definitely feel that he's overshadowed by some other authors on runes. But perhaps because he does, perhaps because he does focus on the Old English runes more than the sort of 24 rune Futhark. And I think it's definitely the case that the Old English runes get overshadowed even in England. Maybe it's also because people have a tendency to sort of romanticize other cultures as well, and even in neopaganism, maybe Scandinavia seems more exotic and interesting than rainy England. So
it does, yeah, and I'll admit that it frustrates me quite a lot. When you see, especially since the Vikings TV show, right, which cropped up a few years ago. There's been this, and I remember when that show first came out, I remember thinking, oh, here we go. I knew what was going to happen. And there's been this enormous surge of interest in, Viking spirituality since then. And in a way, that's a really positive thing. But the problem is that all of the people who have gravitated towards that have completely overstepped the English connection to what is essentially the same spirituality. Yeah. So you have Viking festivals in England, right. And the people that organise them think that is the only way to kind of present the ideas of the runes and the gods and the various practices and that type of dress and those type of musical instruments and things to the English public, when actually what we have directly in England through the Anglo-Saxons is pretty much the same, just with a few kind of superficial tweaks, really. Yeah. And it's I find it frustrates me a lot that we always turn to Scandinavia rather than to our own kind of original connection to the same spirituality. Right. But hopefully those people will eventually find that there is that more direct connection.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Yeah. So maybe just talk a little bit about your practice, if you wouldn't mind, about how you connect to the ancient pagan tradition or to nature and what that does for you.
Yeah, sure. I have a very informal kind of way of doing that. I mostly blot solo on my own, sometimes with my family, but I usually like to go out late at night, and I have a really lovely silver birch tree at the end of my garden, where I perform my blots. And usually I just I take a libation of some sort there, and I usually begin by thanking the relevant gods and always my ancestors as well. I always include them in those practices. Yeah. And I usually thank them for what has gone right for me and my family, and what we do have. And then sometimes I leave it at that, and it's just a thanking, and I share the libation. So, but sometimes if I feel that I need some assistance with something in life, I'll thank the deities and the ancestors, and then I'll go on to ask for assistance with something beyond that. And it's really that simple for me. I do it in a specific place, usually in the evening. Yeah. And it's usually quite a brief affair. When I when I practice with the groups that I meet up with, it's usually excuse me, it's usually more comprehensive than that, usually a little bit more formal.
Right.
Other than that, I've always said that I believe that certainly for me and for people like me who are drawn to art and creativity,
Yeah.
Of which I'm sure most pagans probably are drawn to
Mm-hmm.
art. I feel that creation is probably the greatest form of worship, because you are using what the gods and ancestors gave you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you have this belief in a kind of this the folkish inheritance that your psyche, your aspects of your spirit, and your personality and your talents come to you through your ancestors, and may be bestowed by the gods. And some of us believe that we are distantly related to the gods.
Right.
So if you're using those talents that you have been granted through your lineage, then I can't really think of a better way to honor your ancestors and the gods than to use those talents to their greatest ability and for the greatest of good. So in a way, my whole endeavor with Wolcensmen is an act of worship.
Right. Yeah, and you mentioned creativity and art, and the aesthetics around Wolcensmen is also quite beautiful and quite fascinating as well. Everything from your, I guess, logo might be a little bit of a profane term, but it is a logo, and some of the album art. So did you create that, or was that did somebody else? Or?
Yeah, I created the logo. It's for those listening who are unfamiliar, it's essentially a very ornate bind rune.
Right.
And my day job is as a graphic designer, so I have some abilities with illustration and things. And I just initially I created a bind rune to try and encapsulate both the wording and the meaning of Wolcensmen. So it's a bind rune consisting of the man rune, 2 Ken runes, and a Tyr rune. So what Wolken means the heavens or the clouds. So the name Wolcensmen essentially means men of the heavens. So this what I wanted to express with the bind rune was a connection to the heavens, with this aspect of kind of guidance and the kinship of Ken,
right.
As well as the aspect that this is something which is being created by man, or through man, I should say. So I created this bind rune, and initially it was just a very simple kind of bind rune consisting of straight lines. But when I came to release my first album, I decided that it would be really great to try and squeeze some more aesthetically pleasing imagery and some more mythologically relevant imagery into that bind rune. So it now consists of knotwork and 2 dragon heads,
right,
which face one another kind of symmetrically in the middle, with a with a small life rune in the middle. So it took a long time. I really kind of agonized over that, but it's become a really integral part of the imagery of Wolcensmen. And the imagery is important, because I want people to always look at a Wolcensmen album cover and immediately know what kind of thing to expect. That's always been quite important to me.
So we've been talking about the runes, and I guess most people probably know what they are, but I should probably say for those who don't know, that the runes were in essence alphabets used in northern continental Europe and in Great Britain, and of course can be found elsewhere as they were spread around by Norse sailors as well. But they each letter or rune also serves as a kind of magical sign as well. And as you mentioned, the bind rune for Wolcensmen is the man rune, Ken rune, and the Tyr rune. And yeah, and what is the significance of a bind rune? Because I noticed that bind runes have become big over the last few years, and I see them in more and more places, but obviously they're regarded as being sort of more magical or having a kind of effect on the world. But maybe you could just talk a little bit about bind runes.
Well, some of your listeners might be familiar with the idea of sigil magic.
Yes, probably.
Yeah, and that's something that I experimented with in my more kind of distant background. Bind runes are essentially a Germanic version of that, and that's really the simplest way to explain them. So, as Angel mentioned, the runes each have a a significant meaning, but those meanings can often be quite general, quite broad. So, in an effort to hone those meanings, you can combine them to kind of form a more specific intention with the bind rune. So yeah, it's really the same. I mean, I'm no expert on sigil magic, but it's really the same principle. This idea that you are, inscribing your intention, in the form of these characters, these forms, these drawings, and that kind of becomes the focus of attention, which, in my own practice, then gets hidden away and kind of left to kind of grow in the dark. So I don't really know how better to describe it than that, but it's this idea of setting down your intention and then putting it to the side, but always being subconsciously aware that intention is there and is working away in the background. And it's the same thing with bind runes. If you have a specific intention or like an idea like Wolcensmen that you want to empower, you can create a bind rune which is specific to that end, and it serves as a point of focus for it.
Right. Yeah, I guess the big difference between bind runes and modern sigil magic, which really was given birth by the artist Austin Osman Spare, I guess the big difference would be that the bind runes, in a sense, would be limited to sort of more archetypal ideas, whereas sigil magic, you could create one for anything, and anything sort of postmodern or.
And I guess that's why it's associated with like chaos magic, isn't it?
Because that's right. Absolutely. Right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, well, it's been great speaking with you. Maybe you could just let people know about where they could find out more about you and Wolcensmen and buy your music, which is really great, and I definitely highly recommend.
Thank you. It's been great speaking with you, Angel. I have a website, which is simply wolcensmen.com. So that's WOLCENSMEN.com. And there are links from there to, Facebook and Instagram. I'm really not very active on the social media platforms. I'm actually probably more active on Telegram with Wolcensmen than anywhere else. Just because I love the fact that when you make a post, everyone who follows you sees it, whereas with Facebook and Instagram, that's not the case, and you have to pay for everyone to see it.
Yeah.
Those are good places to find out what I'm doing. I'm quite preoccupied with other musical projects at the moment, where I'm involved with a couple of bands as a member. So I've not been too active with Wolcensmen recently, but I will be in the future. And the best place to buy any records or merchandise would be bloodfiremerch.com, which is a small kind of merch company which I run with my wife. And we've got some other band stuff on there as well.
Right.
We don't actually have any Wolcensmen records in stock at the moment, but Bandcamp is a great place to support me directly if you'd like to. All the records are up on there, physical copies and digital as well.
So, great, yeah, awesome. Thank you. That's been fantastic. Good speaking with you, and good luck. Good luck with Wolcensmen.
Thank you.